Sometimes the most dangerous mistake isn't pulling someone over. It's deciding who they are before they ever speak. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across Interstate 285 just outside Atlanta, where traffic rolled at a steady 65 miles per hour beneath a sky painted with fading gold. Families headed home after baseball practice. Delivery trucks drifted between lanes. Commuters counted the last few miles before dinner. It looked like an ordinary Thursday, the kind of day that rarely made the evening news. Then a black SUV eased into the right lane, perfectly within the speed limit, its driver calm, focused, and unaware that someone had already decided he didn't belong behind the wheel. Officer Ethan Walker rested one hand on the steering wheel of his patrol cruiser while scanning the traffic ahead. His eyes moved from one vehicle to another until they settled on the dark SUV. He watched it for several seconds, his expression tightening with quiet suspicion that had nothing to do with reckless driving, expired tags, or broken taillights. The vehicle wasn't weaving. It wasn't speeding. It wasn't violating any traffic law. Yet something about the driver seemed, in Ethan's mind, out of place. Without hesitation, he pulled into the lane behind the SUV and matched its speed. Inside the SUV, Marcus Reed adjusted the air conditioning 1 degree cooler and glanced briefly at the dashboard clock. His navy button-down shirt was neatly pressed, his posture relaxed, and a leather briefcase rested on the passenger seat beside him. Classical music played softly through the speakers, almost disappearing beneath the steady hum of the highway. His phone vibrated once inside the center console, displaying a secure notification that he ignored without a second glance. Whatever message had arrived could wait. At least, that was what he believed. Blue lights suddenly flashed across his rearview mirror, cutting through the peaceful drive like a bolt of lightning. Marcus looked into the mirror, then calmly activated his turn signal before guiding the SUV onto the shoulder. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as the vehicle came to a smooth stop. Around them, passing cars slowed ever so slightly, their drivers curious enough to glance, but too busy to linger. Marcus took a slow breath, placed both hands on the steering wheel where they were clearly visible, and waited. He had learned long ago that patience often revealed more than anger ever could. Officer Walker stepped out of his cruiser with measured confidence, adjusting the body camera clipped neatly to the center of his uniform before approaching the driver's window. His expression never softened. Before Marcus had the chance to speak, Walker leaned forward and said in a flat, unmistakably dismissive tone, "License, registration, and keep your hands where I can see them." Marcus nodded politely. "Of course, officer." His voice was calm enough to contrast sharply with the growing tension in the air. As Marcus slowly reached toward the glove compartment, Walker's eyes drifted across the spotless interior, the expensive dashboard, the leather briefcase, and the quiet confidence of the man sitting behind the wheel. For reasons even he could not have fully explained, every ordinary detail only deepened his suspicion. A pickup truck passing nearby slowed enough for its passenger to glance toward the roadside. Across the median, another driver instinctively reached for a phone, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Marcus handed over his documents without argument, meeting the officer's gaze with quiet composure instead of fear or frustration. Walker studied the license longer than necessary, then looked back at Marcus with a faint smile that carried no warmth. "Mind telling me how you ended up driving a vehicle like this?" he asked. Marcus paused for only a heartbeat before answering with remarkable restraint. "I work hard, just like a lot of people do." Neither man realized that within the next few moments, a single object resting silently inside Marcus's wallet would transform an ordinary traffic stop into the moment that ended one career and changed many lives forever. Officer Ethan Walker let the driver's license rest between his fingers for several long seconds, reading the name more than once as though repetition alone might reveal something hidden. Marcus Reed, age 39, Georgia resident. Every detail matched the registration in front of him. There were no outstanding warrants, no alerts, no expired documents, and no indication that anything about the stop should have continued beyond a polite warning and a simple farewell. Yet Walker did not step back toward his cruiser. Instead, he remained beside the window, studying Marcus with the same skeptical expression that had followed him since the moment he spotted the black SUV in traffic. The passing vehicles created a steady stream of wind that carried the distant sound of engines across the highway shoulder. A family in a minivan slowed slightly before continuing on. A delivery driver glanced toward the patrol car and then returned his attention to the road. Ordinary people witnessed only another traffic stop, unaware that assumptions rather than evidence were shaping every second of the encounter. Marcus remained exactly as he had been from the beginning. Both hands rested calmly on the steering wheel. His breathing was slow and controlled. He answered every question with quiet respect, never raising his voice or showing irritation. Years of experience had taught him that composure often revealed more about another person than confrontation ever could. Walker leaned down again and looked beyond Marcus toward the leather briefcase resting on the passenger seat. Its polished surface reflected the afternoon sunlight filtering through the windshield. Beside it sat a neatly folded navy jacket and a stainless steel travel mug that had long since cooled. Everything inside the vehicle appeared organized, almost deliberate. Somehow, that only seemed to make Walker more suspicious. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. "Downtown Atlanta," Marcus answered. "Business meeting." "What kind of business?" Walker continued. Marcus offered a small, polite smile. "Professional work." The answer was truthful without revealing more than necessary. Walker frowned, clearly dissatisfied. "That sounds pretty vague." Marcus met his eyes without hesitation. "You asked what kind of work." I answered. The silence that followed stretched for several uncomfortable seconds. Walker stepped back and pressed the button on his shoulder radio. His voice remained controlled as he requested a routine records check, although there was a subtle determination beneath every word, as though he expected the computer system to uncover something that justified his instincts. Marcus watched the patrol officer through the side mirror without moving his hands. Inside the center console, his phone vibrated again. This time the screen briefly illuminated before fading back to black. Walker noticed the faint glow through the windshield. "Whose phone is that?" he asked. "Mine," Marcus replied. "Are you expecting an important call?" "Everyone has important calls now and then." Walker gave a short nod that carried little agreement. He circled slowly around the SUV, inspecting it from every angle. His attention paused on the spotless paint, the new tires, and the government-issued parking decal tucked discreetly in one corner of the windshield, partially obscured by reflected sunlight. He did not seem to recognize its significance. A second patrol vehicle appeared in the distance before pulling onto the shoulder nearly 50 yards behind Walker's cruiser. Officer Daniel Brooks stepped out, adjusting his sunglasses as he approached. Unlike Walker, Brooks observed quietly before saying anything. He glanced at Marcus, then at the documents still resting in Walker's hand, sensing that the situation had already lasted longer than a routine stop should have. "Everything all right?" Brooks asked. Walker answered without taking his eyes off Marcus. "Just making sure everything checks out." Brooks nodded but noticed something else. Marcus showed no signs of nervousness, no rushed explanations, no defensive gestures, only remarkable patience, as though he already understood exactly where this encounter was headed. Far above them, dark clouds slowly gathered along the western horizon, casting long shadows across the interstate. The afternoon light began to soften, and with it came a quiet feeling that the ordinary rules governing this roadside stop were about to change in ways none of the officers had anticipated. Officer Daniel Brooks accepted the driver's license from Ethan Walker and examined it with the quiet efficiency of someone who had completed thousands of routine traffic stops. After only a few seconds, he looked back toward Marcus Reed with an expression that carried curiosity rather than suspicion. "Sir, have you been informed why you were stopped today?" he asked politely. Marcus answered with the same calm tone that had remained unchanged since the flashing lights first appeared behind him. "No, officer. I was hoping someone would explain that." Brooks glanced briefly toward Walker before returning the license. "Did you notice any equipment problem with your vehicle?" Marcus slowly shook his head. "No, sir. Everything was inspected last week." The answer seemed reasonable. The SUV appeared well-maintained, its registration current, and every visible detail suggested careful ownership. Walker folded his arms. "Sometimes people do not always notice when something is wrong." Marcus nodded respectfully. "That is certainly possible. If there is an issue, I would appreciate knowing about it so I can correct it." His response left no room for argument. There was no sarcasm, no hostility, No attempt to embarrass the officers standing outside his window. Instead, his patience quietly shifted the atmosphere. Brooks looked once more at the vehicle, then toward the highway where traffic continued flowing without interruption. Something about the encounter no longer felt routine. Walker requested another update over the radio. The dispatcher responded that Marcus Reed's driver's license remained valid, the registration was active, insurance had been confirmed, and there were no criminal alerts associated with either the vehicle or its owner. The report should have ended the stop. Instead, Walker remained silent for several moments, staring toward the passenger seat where the leather briefcase rested exactly where it had been since the beginning. "What is inside the briefcase?" Walker finally asked. Marcus turned his head slightly toward it before answering. "Work documents. Would you mind opening it?" Walker continued. Marcus paused just long enough for the passing breeze to rustle the leaves of a nearby pine tree. "Officer, is there a specific reason you need to inspect my personal work materials?" The question was respectful, direct, and impossible to misunderstand. Brooks shifted his weight slightly. He had heard that question before during lawful traffic stops, and it was usually followed by a clear explanation. This time, none came. Walker simply repeated himself. "I asked if you would open it." Marcus remained composed. "I always try to cooperate with law enforcement, but I also believe every request deserves a clear explanation. If there is one, I am listening." Another uncomfortable silence settled over the shoulder of the interstate. Even the sounds of passing traffic seemed farther away now. Brooks noticed something small that Walker had overlooked. Resting beside the briefcase was a simple notebook with neatly written initials embossed in silver across the cover. The initials matched the name on the driver's license. Everything inside the vehicle reflected consistency, discipline, and organization. Nothing suggested panic or deception. A faint vibration echoed once more from inside the center console. This time the phone screen illuminated long enough for Brooks to notice only 2 words before it disappeared again. "Secure line." He said nothing, assuming it belonged to some corporate employer or government contractor. Marcus did not even glance toward it. His attention remained fixed on the officers with remarkable self-control. Walker seemed increasingly unsettled by that composure. Most drivers became anxious when questioned. Some talked too much. Others argued. Marcus did neither. He simply answered what was asked and waited. Imagine standing there after doing everything the law requires, knowing every document is valid, every answer is truthful, and still realizing that none of those facts seem enough to end a simple traffic stop. Sometimes silence exposes more than accusations ever could. As dark clouds drifted farther across the afternoon sky, another voice suddenly broke through the radio, clipped to Walker's shoulder. It was calm, professional, and unexpected. "Unit 12, dispatch has additional information regarding your traffic stop. Please acknowledge when ready to copy." Walker reached for the microphone without realizing that the next words he was about to hear would quietly begin unraveling everything he believed about the man waiting patiently inside the black SUV. Walker lifted the radio microphone toward his shoulder without taking his eyes off Marcus Reed. "Unit 12, go ahead," he replied. A brief burst of static filled the air before the dispatcher continued in a measured voice. "Unit 12, records are clear. Valid license. Valid registration. Active insurance. No wants or warrants. Additional information available through restricted access only." Walker frowned. "Restricted access." The dispatcher paused for a moment. "Affirmative. Information requires supervisory authorization." Brooks looked toward Walker with quiet confusion. In his years on patrol, restricted records were uncommon, but they were not automatically suspicious. Some government employees, judges, prosecutors, and protected witnesses had limited information in public systems. It was unusual, but certainly not evidence of wrongdoing. Walker, however, interpreted the response differently. He lowered the microphone and looked directly at Marcus. "Interesting," he said slowly. "You have information that regular officers cannot see." Marcus answered without hesitation. "Apparently that is what dispatch said." "Would you like to explain why?" Walker asked. Marcus remained perfectly still. "If dispatch has already informed you that my records are valid, I believe they have answered the important question." The reply was calm, respectful, and impossible to mistake for defiance. Yet Walker's expression hardened. Brooks quietly watched both men. He noticed that Marcus never interrupted, never argued, and never once reached for anything inside the vehicle without first informing the officers. Every movement reflected patience. Every answer reflected discipline. Still, Walker appeared more determined than ever to find a reason to continue. He stepped closer to the passenger side window and studied the leather briefcase again. The polished brass clasp caught the fading afternoon sunlight. Nearby, the secure phone remained untouched inside the center console, its screen dark once again. Whatever messages had arrived, Marcus had ignored every one of them. Walker folded the driver's license and registration together before handing them back through the open window. "Step out of the vehicle for a moment," he said. Marcus accepted the documents carefully. "May I ask if I am being detained, officer?" "I asked you to step out," Walker repeated. Marcus gave a polite nod. "I understand your request." He slowly unfastened his seatbelt, opened the driver's door, and stepped onto the shoulder without sudden movement. The warm Georgia air carried the distant scent of fresh asphalt and summer grass as passing vehicles continued toward downtown Atlanta. A few drivers slowed slightly, their attention drawn by the growing police presence. Brooks noticed two motorists watching from the opposite shoulder after pulling safely into a nearby rest area. One quietly lifted a phone, recording from a distance without interfering. Marcus stood beside his SUV with his hands relaxed at his sides, maintaining a respectful distance from both officers. Walker circled him once, studying his clothing, polished shoes, and composed expression. There was something about Marcus that refused to fit the assumptions Walker had formed the instant he saw the SUV in his rearview mirror. That contradiction only seemed to deepen his frustration. "You seem awfully calm," Walker observed. Marcus offered a faint smile. Remaining calm usually helps everyone. Brooks could not disagree. The encounter had already lasted far longer than most lawful traffic stops, yet Marcus had never once raised his voice. He simply answered questions, followed instructions, and waited. Imagine standing on the shoulder of a busy interstate while strangers drove past, wondering what they believed they were seeing. Some would assume the officers had a reason. Others would never know that every official record had already confirmed nothing was wrong. The wind picked up slightly as another message crackled across Walker's radio, this one carrying an unmistakable urgency. "Unit 12, Supervisor requests that you do not access any restricted records. Repeat, do not. Proceed until federal coordination confirms identity." Brooks slowly turned toward Walker. The words hung in the air heavier than the approaching storm clouds, while Marcus remained quietly composed, as though he had expected that message long before anyone else heard it. The words from dispatch lingered in the heavy afternoon air long after the radio fell silent. Officer Daniel Brooks looked toward Ethan Walker, expecting him to acknowledge the supervisor's instruction and bring the stop to a professional conclusion. Instead, Walker remained fixed on Marcus Reed, as though the restricted notice had only strengthened his determination. "Federal coordination," Walker repeated quietly. That is an unusual phrase for an ordinary driver. Marcus stood beside his vehicle with the same composed expression he had worn since the flashing lights first appeared behind him. "I cannot explain information that is not mine to discuss," he answered. His voice carried neither arrogance nor fear. It was simply factual. Walker took another slow look around the SUV. The afternoon breeze shifted the leaves of nearby trees while clouds continued gathering over the western horizon. Traffic rolled steadily past, but the roadside itself had grown strangely still. Brooks noticed the untouched travel mug inside the vehicle, the neatly organized papers visible through the edge of the leather briefcase, and the dashboard clock quietly counting each passing minute. Nothing about the scene suggested panic. Everything suggested preparation. Walker glanced once more through the windshield. The government parking decal reflected a beam of sunlight before disappearing beneath a passing shadow. He narrowed his eyes, but still could not quite make out the small lettering printed across it. Nearby, the secure phone vibrated again. This time its screen remained illuminated for only a heartbeat before fading, displaying another incoming secure notification that Marcus ignored completely. Brooks found that detail more curious than suspicious. Most people reach for a ringing phone almost automatically. Marcus never even looked toward it. "You have received several messages," Walker observed. "You are not going to answer them." Marcus smiled politely. "Not while I am speaking with law enforcement." Brooks quietly nodded to himself. It was exactly the kind of answer he hoped to hear during any roadside encounter. Respectful, direct, controlled. Walker, however, seemed increasingly frustrated by the absence of contradiction. Every question produced a measured answer. Every assumption met quiet patience instead of argument. The silence between them became almost louder than the passing traffic. A tractor-trailer rolled by, creating a gust of wind that briefly lifted the edge of Marcus's navy jacket resting inside the SUV. For a split second, Brooks noticed what appeared to be a small embossed seal on the corner of a dark folder partially tucked beneath the briefcase. Before he could focus on it, the jacket settled back into place. He said nothing. There was no reason to speculate. Walker slowly paced around the rear of the vehicle once again. His body camera recorded every step, every question, and every response. Unnoticed by him, another camera had already begun recording as well. Across the highway, a college student who had stopped at the nearby rest area continued filming from a distance, capturing the growing encounter from an entirely different angle. Marcus remained where he had been instructed to stand, hands visible, posture relaxed, his attention focused on the officers rather than the gathering audience. Imagine standing there while complete strangers quietly formed opinions about a moment they did not fully understand. Some passing drivers assumed the officers must have discovered something important. Others wondered why a stop that should have lasted only minutes continued stretching toward half an hour. Neither group knew that every official record had already confirmed the same simple truth. Brooks broke the silence carefully. "Officer Walker, dispatch confirmed everything is valid. Perhaps we should contact the supervisor and wait for guidance." Walker did not answer immediately. His eyes drifted once more toward Marcus's wallet resting just inside the open driver's door pocket. A small corner of a dark credential holder was barely visible, beneath the leather fold before disappearing again as the wind shifted the door. Walker never noticed it. Marcus did, but he made no effort to reach for it. He simply waited, knowing that sometimes the truth arrived most powerfully when it revealed itself instead of being announced. 20 minutes earlier, before the blue lights ever appeared in his rearview mirror, Marcus Reed had left a quiet federal office building on the northern edge of downtown Atlanta, carrying the same leather briefcase that now rested inside his SUV. The meeting he attended had been deliberately unremarkable from the outside. No flashing credentials, no marked government vehicles, no dramatic entrances or exits. Inside a secure conference room, however, maps, timelines, and carefully organized case files covered a long oak table. A senior federal supervisor had ended the briefing with one simple reminder: the investigation stays confidential until every piece is in place. Marcus had acknowledged with a quiet nod. Years of service had taught him that patience often protected the truth better than urgency ever could. He was not assigned to chase headlines or seek recognition. His responsibility was to observe, document, verify, and allow evidence to speak louder than assumptions. Before leaving the building, another agent handed Marcus a secure phone programmed to receive priority communications only if the operation required immediate attention. "Hopefully you will never need to answer this today," the agent had said with a faint smile. Marcus slipped the phone into the center console of his SUV beside his wallet and started the drive home, expecting nothing more complicated than Atlanta traffic during the afternoon rush. Back on the interstate shoulder, that same phone remained untouched despite several secure notifications arriving one after another. Marcus understood exactly who might be trying to reach him, but he also understood another principle that had guided his entire career: respect lawful procedure first, explain later. Around him, Officer Daniel Brooks quietly considered everything that had happened since the stop began. Every answer Marcus had given was consistent. Every official record had confirmed his identity. Dispatch had specifically instructed them to wait for federal coordination. None of those facts fit the picture Walker seemed determined to create. Ethan Walker, however, believed experience mattered more than coincidence. He had convinced himself that something about Marcus simply did not add up, even though every available fact suggested otherwise. Sometimes certainty built on assumptions becomes louder than certainty built on evidence. That quiet difference was beginning to shape every decision made along the shoulder of Interstate 285. The wind shifted again, carrying the distant rumble of approaching thunder. The sky had darkened enough that the reflective surfaces of both patrol cars glowed beneath the afternoon light. Several passing drivers continued slowing briefly before moving on, while the college student across the highway never lowered the phone recording the encounter from a safe distance. Marcus noticed none of them. His attention remained fixed on the officers standing before him. He had spent years interviewing witnesses, speaking with victims, and working alongside local departments across the country. He understood that one difficult conversation could reveal a person's character more clearly than months of ordinary interaction. That understanding was exactly why he never interrupted Walker, never challenged Brooks, and never reached for the credential holder still resting quietly inside his wallet. The truth would arrive at the proper moment. It always did. Suddenly, the secure phone inside the SUV emitted a different tone than before, one reserved for priority communications. Brooks instinctively looked toward the vehicle. Walker heard it as well, but dismissed the sound with little interest. Then another voice came across the patrol radio, calmer than before, but carrying unmistakable authority. Unit 12, Federal Liaison has established contact with dispatch. Supervisor advises no further investigative action until identification has been formally confirmed. A representative is already en route to your location. Brooks slowly exhaled. Walker remained silent. Marcus simply looked toward the darkening horizon, where distant lightning flickered behind thick summer clouds, as though he had known from the very beginning that the next people to arrive would change the direction of every conversation that had taken place on that roadside. The first vehicle arrived without flashing emergency lights. It was a dark, gray government-issued SUV that exited the interstate with quiet precision before rolling onto the shoulder several car lengths behind the patrol cruisers. Its appearance was so ordinary that most passing drivers barely noticed it. Yet the moment Officer Daniel Brooks saw the federal license plate, something inside him shifted. He lowered his voice. "Walker, I think our supervisor was not exaggerating." Ethan Walker folded his arms, determined not to surrender control of the situation. "Let us wait and see who steps out." The driver's door opened, and a middle-aged woman wearing a simple navy business suit walked toward them carrying nothing except a slim tablet and a leather portfolio. There was no dramatic entrance, no raised voice, and no visible urgency. Her confidence came from something much quieter. She already knew exactly why she was there. Marcus Reed recognized her immediately, but did not acknowledge her with anything more than a slight nod. She returned the gesture just as subtly before addressing the officers. "Good afternoon. I am Special Agent Rebecca Collins with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Which one of you is Officer Ethan Walker?" The question landed with unexpected weight. Walker stepped forward. "That would be me." Rebecca offered a professional smile. "Thank you. Dispatch informed us there was an extended traffic stop involving one of our personnel." Walker's expression remained firm. "Your personnel?" Rebecca glanced briefly toward Marcus before looking back at Walker. "Yes." For the first time since the stop had begun, silence settled over everyone present. Even the steady flow of interstate traffic seemed distant beneath the gathering storm clouds. Walker looked toward Marcus, then back to Rebecca. No one identified themselves as federal law enforcement. Marcus finally spoke, his voice as calm as it had been throughout the entire encounter. "Officer, you never asked whether I worked in law enforcement. You asked where I had been and what kind of work I did. I answered both questions truthfully." Brooks quietly replayed every conversation in his mind and realized Marcus was correct. Every answer had been honest. Every response had respected the questions exactly as they had been asked. Rebecca turned toward Marcus with a courteous nod. "Agent Reed, would you please confirm your identity for the record?" Marcus reached slowly into the open driver's door pocket where his wallet had remained untouched since the beginning of the stop. Every movement was deliberate, giving both officers ample opportunity to observe. He unfolded the dark leather credential holder and presented it at chest level. The gold Federal Bureau of Investigation badge reflected the fading afternoon light, while the official identification card rested beside it. Brooks immediately recognized the seal. His posture straightened almost instinctively. Walker stared without speaking. The credential remained visible only a few moments before Marcus carefully closed it again. There was no attempt to make the moment theatrical. No satisfaction crossed his face. He simply returned the wallet to his pocket. Rebecca opened her portfolio and displayed a digital authorization confirming Marcus Reed's active assignment with the Bureau. Special Agent Reed is currently participating in an ongoing federal investigation, she explained. Certain identifying information has been intentionally restricted within public law enforcement databases. That restriction exists to protect both the investigation and the personnel assigned to it. Brooks slowly removed his sunglasses, suddenly understanding every unusual message dispatch had transmitted throughout the afternoon. The secure notifications, the restricted records, the supervisor's repeated instructions. Every unexplained detail fit together with perfect clarity. Across the interstate, the college student continued recording, unaware that the quiet moment unfolding on the roadside would soon spread far beyond a simple traffic stop. Walker remained frozen, his earlier confidence replaced not by panic, but by the unmistakable realization that every assumption he had relied upon had collapsed beneath a single leather credential holder. Marcus looked at him with neither anger nor triumph. "A badge," he said gently, "is supposed to remind us to verify facts before reaching conclusions." No one answered. They did not need to. The truth had spoken more clearly than anyone else on that roadside ever could. The silence lingered for several long moments after Marcus Reed returned his credential holder to his pocket. No one rushed to fill it. The afternoon wind swept across the shoulder of the interstate, carrying with it the distant rumble of thunder that seemed to echo the shift taking place before everyone's eyes. Special Agent Rebecca Collins calmly opened the tablet she had been carrying and reviewed several documents before looking directly at Officer Ethan Walker. Her tone remained professional, free of accusation or emotion. "Officer Walker, this traffic stop and all associated body camera recordings will be preserved for administrative review in accordance with federal and departmental procedures." Walker nodded slowly, though his earlier confidence had disappeared. He understood that every decision made during the past 30 minutes had been documented from multiple angles. Brooks quietly glanced toward Walker's body camera, then toward the college student still recording safely from the nearby rest area. Neither recording had captured dramatic action. They had captured something far more important. Every assumption, every question, every opportunity to end the stop that had been ignored. Rebecca continued speaking with the same measured voice. "Agent Reed has been participating in a coordinated federal operation involving multiple agencies. While today's stop was unrelated to that assignment, any unnecessary delay involving protected personnel requires formal review to ensure operational security." Brooks immediately understood the significance. The issue was not simply that Marcus worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The extended roadside detention had interrupted the carefully planned movement of an active federal investigator whose schedule had been coordinated well beyond the local department. Marcus remained remarkably composed. He neither interrupted nor added to Rebecca's explanation. Instead, he quietly watched the passing traffic as though the entire encounter had become another observation in a much larger lesson about human judgment. Another unmarked government vehicle arrived a few minutes later. This one carried representatives from the local department's Professional Standards Division. A senior captain stepped out and greeted Rebecca with a brief handshake before approaching the two patrol officers. "Officer Brooks, thank you for your cooperation," the captain said. "Officer Walker, I will need your body camera equipment and incident notes at the conclusion of this encounter pending administrative review." The words were delivered calmly and respectfully. No raised voices. No public embarrassment. Only procedure. Walker slowly acknowledged the instruction. He removed the recording device according to department policy and handed it to the captain, who secured it inside an evidence pouch without further comment. Brooks watched quietly, recognizing that accountability often arrived without spectacle. Sometimes the greatest consequences began with nothing more dramatic than paperwork and careful documentation. Rebecca turned toward Marcus. "Agent Reed, headquarters has arranged alternate transportation if you prefer not to continue driving today." Marcus smiled politely before shaking his head. "Thank you, Rebecca, but I believe I will finish the drive myself." She returned the smile. "That sounds like something you would say." For the first time that afternoon, a faint sense of relief appeared on Brooks's face. The tension that had stretched across the roadside slowly gave way to quiet reflection. He looked toward Marcus. "Sir," he said sincerely, I appreciate the professionalism you showed throughout this entire situation. Marcus nodded. Professionalism is easiest to maintain when we remember that respect is not something we earn after learning a person's title. It is something we choose before we know anything about them. Brooks lowered his eyes for a moment, allowing those words to settle. Nearby, the captain completed the required documentation while Rebecca finalized her report on the tablet. The storm clouds that had gathered overhead began drifting eastward, allowing a narrow beam of late afternoon sunlight to break through and illuminate the shoulder where the encounter had unfolded. Traffic resumed its ordinary rhythm, and one by one the government vehicles prepared to leave. Nothing about the highway looked different from an hour earlier. Yet for everyone who had stood beside that black SUV, the meaning of authority, responsibility, and fairness would never look quite the same again. Marcus Reed stood quietly for one final moment beside his black SUV, watching as the last of the government vehicles prepared to leave the shoulder of Interstate 285. The late afternoon sky had changed once again. The heavy storm clouds that had threatened rain only minutes earlier were beginning to separate, allowing warm sunlight to spill across the pavement in long golden streaks. The same highway that had witnessed suspicion now witnessed something else entirely. Reflection. Officer Daniel Brooks approached Marcus with a respectful expression that no longer carried uncertainty. "I hope your drive home is much quieter than the beginning of your afternoon," he said. Marcus smiled gently. "So do I." Brooks hesitated before extending his hand. Marcus accepted the gesture without hesitation. It was not a dramatic reconciliation. It was simply two professionals acknowledging that respect had finally found its proper place. Nearby, Captain William Harris completed the last page of his report before walking toward Ethan Walker. The conversation between them remained private, spoken quietly, and without spectacle. Walker listened carefully, nodding only once before handing over the final pieces of documentation requested for administrative review. His shoulders no longer carried the confidence that had marked the beginning of the traffic stop. Instead, they reflected the weight that often follows difficult lessons. Accountability had arrived not through anger or humiliation, but through the ordinary procedures every officer promises to uphold. Rebecca Collins closed her tablet and walked toward Marcus one last time. "Headquarters will handle everything from here," she said. Marcus nodded. "Thank you for responding so quickly." She smiled. "You have always believed that patience speaks louder than arguments." Marcus looked briefly toward the interstate where hundreds of strangers continued driving toward destinations they would likely reach without remembering this particular afternoon. "Sometimes," he answered quietly, "people remember the moment. What matters most is whether they remember the lesson." Rebecca understood exactly what he meant. She wished him a safe drive before returning to her vehicle. One by one the engines started, and the federal convoy disappeared back into the steady rhythm of Atlanta traffic. Brooks remained beside his patrol cruiser for several seconds after everyone else had left. He looked down the shoulder where Marcus's SUV still rested, then back toward the empty stretch of highway behind him. He realized that every traffic stop began with the same responsibility. Observe carefully. Verify facts. Treat every person with dignity. None of those principles depended upon someone's profession, appearance, neighborhood, or the vehicle they happened to drive. Marcus entered his SUV, adjusted the rearview mirror, and placed both hands on the steering wheel exactly as he had done before the stop began. His secure phone displayed several missed notifications, but none of them seemed as important as the quiet understanding he carried away from the roadside. Before shifting into drive, he paused for one final glance through the windshield. The shoulder was empty now. The flashing lights were gone. The questions had been answered. The assumptions had been replaced by facts. He eased back onto the interstate, blending into the flow of ordinary traffic as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet somewhere behind him, reports would be reviewed, conversations would be held, policies would be examined, and careers would be shaped by the choices made during one routine afternoon. Imagine how different that day might have been if the first judgment had been replaced with the first question, if curiosity had come before conclusions, or if respect had arrived before assumptions. The truth had never been hidden. It had simply waited for someone willing to see it. And perhaps that is how justice most often works. Not with loud celebrations or dramatic victories, but but with quiet moments that remind ordinary people that character is never revealed by the badge someone carries in a wallet. Character is revealed by the choices they make long before anyone knows who they are. Because real authority is not measured by the power to stop someone on the side of the road. It is measured by the wisdom to treat every person with fairness before the truth has a chance to introduce itself.